in the heart of West Africa, among the Yoruba people of Nigeria, a divine force emerges that defies the very laws of nature. Oya, the only goddess capable of commanding the spirits of the dead, controlling devastating storms, and raising armies of lost souls. But few know the true story behind this immortal warrior. A mortal woman who conquered powers so terrifying that even the gods fear her fury. In Ira, a small town in what is now Kwara State, Nigeria, a woman named Oya lived as wife to the powerful Alafin of Oyo. The royal compound bustled with activity during those days. Servants hurried through courtyards carrying water from the Niger River. Traders haggled in the marketplace just beyond the palace walls. And the other wives of the king occupied themselves with domestic duties and political maneuvering. But Oya was different. While the other women gossiped and schemed for their children's advancement, she stood alone on the terrace, her eyes fixed on the horizon with an intensity that unsettled those who noticed. The wind seemed to respond to her moods, picking up when she grew agitated, calming when she found peace. Palace guards whispered among themselves when she passed. Candles flickered in rooms with no draft, and the air itself felt charged with electricity in her presence. The royal diviners had consulted the oracle about her more than once, but the readings were always the same: cryptic warnings about transformation and power beyond mortal comprehension. Her skin held the rich, deep tone of polished mahogany, and her hair, which she refused to tame into the elaborate styles favored by court ladies, grew wild and unruly, as if it had a will of its own. When she walked through the palace gardens, leaves swirled in her wake even on windless days. The elephant loved her, but he also feared her in ways he couldn't articulate. There was something ancient in her gaze, something that suggested she saw beyond the physical world into realms that mortals were not meant to perceive. She would spend hours staring at storm clouds gathering in the distance, and servants swore they heard her whispering to the wind itself, carrying on conversations with invisible forces. The other wives avoided her, crossing to the opposite side of courtyards when they saw her approaching, making protective gestures with their hands. Everything changed the day Shango arrived at the palace. The god of thunder and lightning had descended to the mortal realm, drawn by rumors of the elephant's power and wealth. But the moment his eyes fell upon Oya, the true purpose of his visit became clear. Their first encounter happened during a ceremonial feast, and the tension between them was immediate and overwhelming. Shango, accustomed to mortals cowering before his divine presence, found himself staring at a woman who met his gaze without flinching, without the slightest hint of submission. When he summoned a small burst of lightning to demonstrate his power, expecting gasps of awe and fear, Oya simply smiled, a knowing, almost mocking expression that infuriated and intrigued him in equal measure. That night, as the palace slept, Oya met Shango in the gardens. What transpired there would reshape the balance of divine power itself. Shango attempted to seduce her with displays of his abilities, calling down thunder from clear skies, making the earth tremble beneath their feet. But Oya was unimpressed by theatrics. She wanted understanding, wanted to know the mechanics of his power, the source of his control over the elements. And in his arrogance, drunk on her beauty and his own perceived superiority, Shango revealed too much. He showed her the sacred movements, the invocations, the precise mental state required to summon lightning. It was meant to be a demonstration of trust, a divine secret shared between lovers. But Oya was more than a lover. She was a force of nature waiting to be unleashed. By dawn, she had done the impossible. Standing in the garden as the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Oya raised her hands to the sky and called down lightning. The bolt struck an ancient baobab tree, splitting it down the middle, and the crack of thunder that followed shook the entire palace awake. Shango stood frozen in shock and fury. A mortal had stolen godly power from him. But when he looked at Oya, crackling with electrical energy, her wild hair standing on end, her eyes blazing with triumph, he realized she was no ordinary mortal. She had always been something more, something waiting to be awakened. But divine power came with a price that Oya couldn't have anticipated. In the months following her transformation, she became aware of a deep, aching emptiness within her. The other wives of the Elephant bore children regularly, filling the palace with the sounds of infants crying and children playing. But Oya's womb remained barren, month after month, year after year. The whispers grew louder. Some said the gods had cursed her for her audacity in stealing Shango's power. Others claimed she had traded her fertility for her supernatural abilities. The pain of childlessness gnawed at her, especially as she watched other women cradle babies against their chests, singing lullabies in the warm Nigerian nights. Desperate and determined, Oya sought out the most powerful Babalawo in all of Yorubaland. The journey took her far from Oyo, through dense forests where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, across rivers swollen with seasonal rains, past villages where people recognized her divine nature and offered prayers and gifts. The Babalawo lived in a compound at the edge of the world, where the forest met the grasslands and the spirits walked openly among the living. He was ancient, his face marked with tribal scars that told the story of his lineage, his eyes clouded with cataracts, but seeing far more than any sighted person. When Oya entered his presence, he didn't need to ask why she had come. The Oracle of Ifa had already revealed her arrival and her desperate need. The divination was extensive, involving elaborate casting of palm nuts, interpretation of patterns in sacred sand, consultations with multiple orishas. Finally, the Babalawo spoke the price: 18,000 sea snails, colored fabrics in specific sacred patterns, and the meat of a ram. The number was astronomical. Sea snails were precious, used as currency and sacred offerings. Acquiring that many would require Oya to travel to distant coastal regions, to bargain with traders who controlled the carousel routes. But she didn't hesitate. She spent months gathering the required items, selling precious possessions, calling in favors, even using her growing supernatural abilities to aid merchants in exchange for their shells. The colored fabrics had to be woven according to precise specifications, each thread a prayer, each pattern a sacred geometry meant to please the orishas. The ram had to be perfect, unblemished, raised specifically for this sacrifice. When she finally returned to the Babalawo with everything required, he conducted a ritual that lasted 3 days and 3 nights. The moment of birth arrived on a night when the stars seemed unusually bright, when even the insects fell silent as if the entire natural world was holding its breath. Oya's labor was attended by the Babalawo and a group of priestesses who had traveled from across Yorubaland to witness what they believed would be a miraculous birth. The pain was beyond anything Oya had imagined. It felt as though her body was tearing itself apart from the inside, as though the very fabric of her being was being rewoven. And then, finally, the first cry, not from a baby, but from Oya herself, a scream of joy and anticipation that shook the walls of the birthing hut. The midwife caught the first child, then another and another. 9 times Oya's body contracted and pushed new life into the world. 9 perfect babies, each one more beautiful than the last. For exactly 7 heartbeats, Oya experienced pure, transcendent happiness. She saw her children, saw their tiny fingers and toes, imagined the lives they would lead, the people they would become. And then silence. A terrible, crushing silence. None of the babies drew breath. None of them moved. All 9 had been born without the spark of life. The sound that came from Oya in that moment was not human. It was a howl of every mother who had ever lost a child, amplified by divine power until it became something else entirely, a force that rippled through both the physical and spiritual realms. Windows shattered in buildings miles away. The Niger River churned and frothed. And in the spirit world, 9 new presences emerged. The babies had not simply died, they had transformed, becoming the Gungun, the ancestral spirits, the intermediaries between the living and the dead. Oya, cradling her lifeless children, felt something fundamental shift within her. The boundary between life and death, which had always been absolute, suddenly became permeable. She could sense her children's spirits, could feel them hovering just beyond the veil, and she understood with devastating clarity that she had become something unprecedented. The mother of 9, the bridge between worlds, the only being in existence who could walk freely between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Babalu I, the powerful Orisha of disease and healing, had been watching. From his celestial vantage point, he observed Oya's transformation with growing respect and admiration. He saw how she didn't allow her grief to destroy her, how she channeled her pain into power, how she honored her 9 children by accepting her new role as their eternal mother. On the 9th day after the births, when Oya was performing the burial rites for her children, Babalu I descended to the mortal realm. His arrival was marked by a sudden shift in the air, a thickness that made breathing difficult, a sense of presence that caused even the bravest warriors to step back. He appeared before Oya as she knelt beside 9 small graves, her hands covered in the red earth of Nigeria, her face streaked with tears that refused to stop falling. Babalu I spoke with a voice that resonated in bones and blood. He told her that her compassion in the face of unbearable loss, her courage in accepting a fate that would have broken lesser beings, had earned her a gift that no other Orisha possessed. He granted her dominion over the Egan, complete and absolute control over the spirits of the dead. This was power beyond measure. Other Orishas could interact with the dead, could send messages or receive prophecies, but only Oya could command them, could summon entire armies of spirits, could open and close the gates between worlds at will. But with this power came responsibility. Oya became the guardian of cemetery gates, the psychopomp who guided newly departed souls through the terrifying transition from life to death. She didn't live among the graves, as many would later believe. Instead, she made her home in the marketplace, the bustling center of human commerce and interaction. There, she watched the living make their fortunes, steer their businesses, build their legacies, all while knowing that eventually, every single one of them would pass through her domain. The marketplace was perfect for her. It was a place of constant change, of transformation, of things dying and new things being born. Merchants who honored Oya found their businesses thriving, their trades blessed with favorable winds. Those who offended her discovered that fortune could turn as quickly as the weather, that prosperity could vanish like morning mist. The relationship between Oya and Shango evolved into something that the other Orishas watched with a mixture of awe and concern. Together, they were unstoppable. His thunder and her winds created storms of unprecedented fury. When they traveled across the land, destruction and renewal followed in equal measure. Villages learned to prepare when they saw storm clouds gathering in specific patterns, knowing that Oya and Shango were approaching. But their relationship was far from simple. Shango, despite his immense power, harbored a deep and abiding fear of death and the dead. It was an unusual weakness for a god of his stature, a vulnerability that he guarded carefully. Oya discovered this fear accidentally one night when Shango was boasting about a battle he'd won against a rival Orisha. She mentioned that the spirits of those who had died in the battle had spoken to her, had told her the true story. Shango's reaction was immediate and telling. He paled, stepped back, demanded she stop talking about the dead in his presence. From that moment, Oya understood that she held a power over Shango that no one else possessed. Their dynamic became a careful dance of equals. When Shango grew too arrogant, too aggressive, too consumed by his own power, Oya would simply begin to speak of the dead, would hint at summoning spirits, and Shango would moderate his behavior. It wasn't cruel or manipulative, it was necessary. Shango's power without check could devastate entire regions. Oya's ability to rein him in prevented catastrophes. And Shango, for all his pride, respected her for it. He had stolen from other Orishas, had defeated enemies through sheer force, but Oya had taken his most guarded secret through intelligence and will. She was his equal in every way that mattered. Before Shango went to war, Oya would go before him, using her command over winds and storms to disorient enemies, to create chaos on battlefields, to prepare the way for his devastating thunder. They developed an almost telepathic understanding in combat, each knowing instinctively what the other would do next. The betrayal came from the ram, an animal that had been Oya's constant companion since before her transformation. In Yoruba tradition, Rams held significant spiritual meaning. They were associated with strength, leadership, and sacrifice. Oya's ram had been more than a pet. It had been a confidant, a creature she'd spoken to during her loneliest moments, especially during the years of her infertility. She'd shared her hopes and fears with the ram, had wept into its woolen coat, had made it promises about the life they'd share once she finally bore children. But the ram harbored ambitions of its own. In the complex spiritual hierarchy of the Yoruba cosmos, even animals could aspire to elevated status. A powerful Orisha named Esu, the trickster who delighted in chaos and upheaval, had placed a bounty on information about Oya's vulnerabilities. The ram, driven by a desire for recognition and reward, decided to collect. The betrayal was methodical and calculating. The ram began gathering information, noting when Oya's powers seemed weakest, documenting the rituals she performed to maintain her connection to the spirit world, identifying the sacred objects she relied upon. It compiled this intelligence over months, waiting for the perfect moment to approach Esu and claim the promised reward. But the spirit world has eyes everywhere, and secrets don't remain hidden for long. The Igungun, Oya's 9 children who existed as ancestral spirits, discovered the ram's treachery. They appeared to their mother in dreams, showing her visions of the ram speaking with Esu's messengers, revealing her secrets. When Oya confronted the ram, the animal didn't deny it. Instead, it justified its actions with cold logic. It had been loyal for years, had received nothing but scraps of attention in return, deserved more than to be a goddess's pet. The hurt in Oya's eyes was profound. This wasn't anger at an enemy's attack or frustration with a rival's schemes. This was the deep, personal pain of betrayal by someone she trusted completely. When Alafai, the supreme being, learned of a ram's treachery, his judgment was swift and absolute. The ram must die. The execution was scheduled as a public ceremony, a warning to any other creature that might consider betraying the Orishas. But as the day approached, Oya found herself in an impossible emotional position. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the danger it had caused, she couldn't bear the thought of watching her former friend die. The ram had been there during her darkest hours, had listened without judgment when she'd felt most alone. Those memories, those moments of genuine connection, couldn't be erased by subsequent betrayal. This internal conflict created a sacred prohibition that would last throughout all time. Oya declared that she could never be present when rams were sacrificed, could never witness their deaths, could never consume their meat. For initiates of Shango and Yamaya, whose favorite offering was ram, this created a complex ritual situation. When these Orishas were being consecrated or honored with ram sacrifice, all of Oya's sacred items had to be removed from the ceremonial space. The scent of ram on a person was enough to disturb her, to remind her of friendship turned to betrayal, of trust transformed into weapon. But Oya's powers extended far beyond her dominion over the dead and her command of storms. Among her most fearsome abilities was the gift of metamorphosis, the power to transform herself into a buffalo. This wasn't a simple magical disguise or illusion. When Oya became a buffalo, she truly became the animal, experiencing the world through its senses, possessing its physical might, channeling its primal fury. The buffalo held deep symbolic significance in Yoruba culture. It represented unstoppable force, maternal protection, and the raw power of nature itself. Buffalo were among the most dangerous animals on the African continent. Unpredictable, powerful enough to kill lions, protective of their herds to the point of suicide charges against predators. When Oya took buffalo form, she embodied all these qualities amplified by divine power. The transformation ritual was sacred and terrible to witness. Oya would retreat to isolated places, deep in forests, on remote riverbanks, in caves hidden from human eyes. She would dance, her movements becoming increasingly animalistic, her human form blurring and shifting. Witnesses who accidentally observed these transformations spoke of seeing her bones reshape themselves, of hearing sounds that were neither human screams nor animal cries, but something in between, of watching her skin ripple and change texture. In buffalo form, Oya roamed the Nigerian savannah with a freedom she never experienced, as a goddess bound to human concerns. She could run for hours, feeling the earth shake beneath her hooves, experiencing the pure physicality of animal existence without the burden of divine consciousness. The buffalo's horns, curved into the shape of a crescent moon, became one of her most recognizable symbols. The crescent moon represented feminine divine power, the cycles of transformation, and the duality of creation and destruction that Oya embodied. For the priests and priestesses dedicated to Oya's worship, the prohibition against killing or eating buffalo was absolute. To do so wasn't merely breaking a religious rule, it was directly attacking the goddess herself, harming her in her animal form. Communities that honored Oya created protected areas where buffalo could graze safely, knowing that these herds might contain the goddess herself. Hunters learned to recognize certain signs: a buffalo with unusually intelligent eyes, one that seemed to watch humans with understanding rather than fear, one around which wind swirled even on calm days. These buffalo were left untouched, honored from a distance. The transatlantic slave trade ripped millions of people from West Africa, destroying families, cultures, and communities. But faith proved harder to destroy than freedom. Yoruba people, stolen from their homeland and forced into ships bound for the Americas, carried their religious beliefs in the only place slavers couldn't reach: their hearts and minds. As slave ships crossed the Atlantic under horrific conditions, dying captives would whisper prayers to Oya, begging her to carry their spirits home, to guide them through the terrifying passage from life to death. In the holds of those ships, surrounded by suffering and despair, the power of the Orishas became not just religious belief, but survival itself. When the Yoruba reached Brazil, they found a Portuguese colonial society that demanded Christian conversion, but couldn't completely suppress African religious practices. The enslaved developed a brilliant strategy of syncretism. They continued worshiping their Orishas, while outwardly appearing to honor Catholic saints. Oya became associated with Saint Barbara, a Christian martyr who had been beheaded by her own father for refusing to renounce her faith. The parallel was perfect. Both were powerful women who wielded lightning. Both were associated with transformation and violent change. Both demanded absolute devotion from their followers. In Brazil, Oya became known as Ayansa in the Candomblé tradition. Her worship adapted to the new environment while maintaining core elements from Yoruba practice. Brazilian devotees honored her with offerings of acarage, a dish made from black-eyed peas that was similar to the akara offered in West Africa. The Niger River, her domain in Africa, was replaced by the Amazon in some traditions, the mighty waterway that carved through the Brazilian landscape with the same power that Oya had commanded in her homeland. In Cuba, the Santeria tradition developed similar syncretism. Oya became Yensa, sometimes confused with or merged with Okan by outside observers, though practitioners understood the distinct nature of each Orisha. Cuban devotees would honor her on the feast day of Our Lady of Candelaria, February 2nd, using Catholic ritual as cover for African religious practice. The adaptation required creativity and courage. Practitioners risked severe punishment if caught in unmistakably African worship, so they developed complex systems of symbols, songs with double meanings, and rituals that appeared Christian on the surface while maintaining African spiritual essence. What's remarkable is how Oya's fundamental nature remained consistent despite crossing oceans and centuries. Whether worshipped in Nigeria, Brazil, Cuba, or Haiti, she remained the fierce warrior goddess of storms and death, the protector of women, the commander of ancestral spirits. In contemporary times, Oya's worship has not diminished, but expanded and evolved. In Nigeria, the Igangan Festival remains a major cultural and religious event, drawing thousands of participants who honor ancestral spirits under Oya's protection. During these festivals, masked dancers representing the Igangan move through communities, their identities completely hidden, their movements believed to be guided by the spirits themselves. The masks are elaborate and terrifying, designed to blur the line between human and spirit, between the living world and the realm of the dead. When an Igangan dancer approaches, people both honor and fear them, offering gifts and prayers while maintaining respectful distance. In Brazil, Candomblé terreiros hold regular ceremonies honoring Ayansa. drummers create rhythms that date back centuries, the same patterns that were played in West Africa before the slave trade. When Nyansa possesses one of her devotees during these ceremonies, the transformation is dramatic. The possessed individual takes on the goddess's characteristics, dancing with fierce energy, speaking with a voice that seems to come from somewhere beyond the mortal body, offering wisdom and warnings to those in attendance. In Cuba and the United States, Santeria communities maintain elaborate shrines to Nyansa. These shrines contain her sacred items, machetes symbolizing her warrior nature, copper items representing her sacred metal, 9 of everything acknowledging her title as Mother of Nine, dark red and purple fabrics reflecting her favorite colors. Devotees bring offerings of eggplant, plums, red wine, and chocolate pudding, foods that please her complex palate. The practice of consulting Oya through divination remains widespread. Practitioners use various methods: cowrie shell reading, tarot adapted to Orisha tradition, or direct mediumship, where Oya speaks through a possessed priest or priestess. People seek her guidance during major life transitions, during times when radical change is necessary but terrifying, when dealing with loss and grief, when facing injustice that requires a warrior's courage to confront. Modern devotees understand that invoking Oya is not something to be done lightly or casually. She doesn't bring gentle, gradual change. When you call upon Oya, you're summoning a hurricane, asking for everything in your life that's false or broken to be stripped away. She tears up problems by the roots, burns away what's decayed, and forces you to rebuild from foundations. Her approach to transformation is radical surgery, not gradual therapy. Oya teaches profound lessons about the nature of change and the necessity of embracing life's storms rather than fleeing from them. In a world that often values stability above all else, that encourages people to maintain the status quo even when it's killing them, Oya represents the revolutionary power of necessary destruction. She reminds us that sometimes the kindest thing we can do is allow what's dying to actually die, to stop desperately clinging to relationships, situations, or versions of ourselves that have run their course. The goddess's connection to death holds particular relevance in contemporary society, where death is often sanitized, hidden, discussed only in whispers. Oya confronts mortality directly, refusing to treat death as something shameful or terrifying. In her mythology, death is a transition, a gateway, a necessary part of existence's cycle. She guides the newly dead not with coldness, but with the fierce compassion of a mother, helping souls navigate the terrifying passage from one state of being to another. For modern practitioners dealing with grief, Oya offers a different model of mourning. Rather than the sanitized, time-limited grief that Western culture often demands, Oya acknowledges that loss transforms us permanently, that we carry our dead with us always, that the boundary between living and dead is more permeable than modern rationalism admits. Through ancestor veneration, Oya's devotees maintain active relationships with those who have passed, speaking to them, asking for guidance, honoring their memory not just with tears, but with celebration, remembrance, and continuation of their legacies. The goddess's fierce protection of women remains powerfully relevant. In her mythology, Oya doesn't achieve power by becoming like men or by diminishing her femininity. Instead, she demonstrates that feminine power can be just as fierce, destructive, and transformative as any masculine force. She challenges patriarchal assumptions about women's roles, women's capabilities, women's acceptable expressions of power. As a warrior goddess who fights alongside her male counterparts as an equal, who steals power when necessary, who refuses to be controlled or diminished, Oya provides a divine model of uncompromising feminine strength. Her story of infertility and loss speaks to countless women who have experienced similar grief. Unlike many fertility goddesses who are defined solely by their ability to bear children, Oya transforms her inability to sustain living children into a different kind of motherhood. She becomes the mother of nine by honoring her stillborn children's transformation into ancestral spirits, finding meaning and power in a situation that could have destroyed her. This offers an alternative narrative for women whose lives don't follow conventional paths of motherhood, suggesting that power and legacy can take many forms. The marketplace connection remains symbolically rich. Markets are places of transformation. Raw materials become finished goods. Labor converts into currency. Strangers become trading partners. Oya's dominion over the marketplace represents her governance of all transformative processes, whether commercial, personal, or spiritual. She steers fortune and change with the same power she commands wind and lightning. In artistic representations across cultures, Oya appears with consistent elements. The machete that cuts through obstacles, the fly whisk that commands the winds, the wild hare that refuses domestication, the 9 swirling tornadoes that acknowledge her sacred number, the deep red and purple colors that represent both royal power and the blood of transformation. Contemporary artists have reimagined Oya for modern contexts, creating images that honor traditional iconography while making her accessible to new generations. She appears in paintings, sculptures, digital art, performance pieces, and musical compositions. Hip-hop artists in Brazil have created songs honoring Iansa, connecting her ancient power to contemporary struggles for justice and recognition. Visual artists have depicted her in contexts ranging from traditional African settings to urban landscapes, showing the goddess's adaptability and continued relevance. The academic study of Oya and other orishas has expanded significantly, with scholars examining the religious, cultural, and psychological dimensions of her worship. Anthropologists document how her traditions have been maintained and transformed across diaspora communities. Psychologists explore the therapeutic value of rituals invoking Oya during times of necessary change. Historians trace the survival of African religious practices through centuries of suppression and persecution. The environmental movement has found unexpected resonance in Oya's mythology. As climate change creates increasingly violent storms and unpredictable weather, Oya's association with hurricanes and tornadoes takes on new meaning. Some practitioners interpret current environmental upheaval as Oya's response to humanity's disrespect for natural forces, a divine reminder that humans don't control nature, but exist within it. The goddess who commands storms becomes a symbol of nature's power to resist human attempts at domination and control. For individuals navigating personal crises, Oya offers a framework for understanding transformation. When life tears apart, through job loss, relationship endings, health crises, grief, or any of the countless ways existence can upend our carefully constructed stability, Oya's mythology suggests that this destruction might be necessary, might be clearing space for something new and essential. She doesn't promise that change will be comfortable or easy, but she does promise to be present during the storm, to guide souls through the transition, to ensure that what's destroyed was meant to fall, and that what survives is strong enough to endure. As we stand here, reflecting on this powerful goddess who controls death, commands storms, and summons the dead, we're confronted with profound questions about power, transformation, and the nature of divine feminine energy. Oya isn't a comfortable goddess. She doesn't offer easy answers or gentle reassurance. Instead, she challenges us to face the storms in our own lives with courage, to accept that growth often requires destruction, to understand that death is not an ending, but a transformation. Her story, carried from West Africa through the horrors of slavery to take root in the Americas and beyond, demonstrates the resilience of faith and culture. Despite centuries of oppression and attempts to erase African religious traditions, Oya's worship not only survived but thrived, adapting to new contexts while maintaining its essential truth. The goddess who tears up the old to make way for the new, who guides the dead with fierce compassion, who demands truth even when it's painful, who protects women with the furious storms. This goddess speaks to something fundamental about human experience. We all face transitions that terrify us, losses that seem unbearable, changes that feel like death even when we're still breathing. Oya teaches us to walk into these storms rather than running from them, to trust that what the winds tear away wasn't meant to last, and that what survives will be stronger for having been tested. What's your perspective on Oya's mythology? Does the idea of a goddess who brings transformation through destruction resonate with your own experiences? Have you ever felt the winds of change tearing through your life, clearing away what no longer served you? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation about power, transformation, and the divine feminine. If this exploration of Oya moved you, if it challenged your thinking or opened new perspectives, hit that subscribe button. We have many more stories to tell about gods and goddesses who defied expectations, who wielded extraordinary power, who shaped the spiritual landscapes of entire civilizations. These aren't just ancient myths. They're living traditions that continue to guide millions of people today, offering wisdom about how to navigate the eternal human challenges of change, loss, power, and transformation. In the winds that rustle through leaves and the tempestuous storms that sweep across the land, we catch glimpses of Oya's powerful essence. She remains present in every necessary ending, every painful transformation, every moment when we must choose between clinging to what's dying or embracing what wants to be born. The goddess who controls death, storms, and the spirits of the ancestors teaches us that true power isn't about maintaining control, but about flowing with the inevitable changes that shape existence itself.